Last week, I made these little guys. I call them battle bobbins. If you haven't watched that video, you can watch it here. Basically, they're just spools of thread with arms and legs made out of beads. Pretty simple. But in last week's video, I promised I would make a really cool diorama with them, and so this week, we're gonna do that. When I was picking up materials for last week's project, I also found these. They're yarn needles. They're basically just large plastic sewing needles. And my original plan was that I could turn them into maybe some type of sword, but when I actually put them up against the battle bobbins I created, they were just a bit too big to be a sword for the right scale, so that got me thinking. Thinking about medieval siege weapons, of course. And as many people will tell you, the best medieval siege weapon is the trebuchet. And of course, the trebuchet is very cool, but I wanted to incorporate these yarn needles I have, and so I was thinking, well, what is the second coolest medieval siege weapon? And that would be the ballista. Basically a large crossbow on steroids that shoots a large bolt, or, in this case, a large sewing needle. So to get started, I gather up some pieces of wood that I had. This is mostly just basswood and different dowels and stir sticks, and I just start putting it together. I don't really have a plan, I'm just going off of that photo that I showed earlier, and just cutting and building as I go. Using the utmost technical and engineering words, I'm going to be building the center bit thingy where the needle is going to sit. And building that first with a couple pieces of wood and some more pieces of wood. For the bow arms, I cut them out of a piece of wood, and I do that twice, and then I stick them together with a piece of double-sided tape, and this will make it easier for me to shape them. Basically, if I put them together and then sand them with my sanding drum, they'll both be sanded to the same shape, and it saves time and makes them more symmetrical. I cut out a notch in the front of the center bit thingy that holds the needle, and this will hold the bow arm. And it just makes everything look a little more fancy, like someone who actually knew what they were doing built it. Now I'm working on the back of the center bit thingy that holds the arrow. This will be the frame that will hold the winding rod that will pull the bowstring back and lock it into place. For the sides of the frame, I take two pieces of wood and glue them together. I'll make two of these, and then I will drill holes in both, and these will hold the winding handle, which will be connected to that winding rod in the middle, which will pull back the bowstring. There it is, all put together, and now I can work on the handles. I take a smaller dowel and drill a hole in the top of it. I put an even smaller dowel in, glue that in place, drill another hole at 90 degrees, and add another small dowel. And this will give me the winding handle, and I'll build two of those, one for each side. I cut the winding rod to size, and then I drill two holes in each end, just big enough for the medium wooden dowels from the handles to fit into. Moving on to the base, again, I don't really have a plan, I'm just sort of cutting and putting things together. I start by making this cross shape, and then I add another wooden piece that will hold up the ballista, and then I just add some framing to the sides. I can now work on the connection between the ballista itself and the base, and I'm using some styrene for that. I cut some pieces of this 90-degree angled styrene and then glue it to this styrene base, and then I will clean that up off camera. I also built this little piece off camera. This will give the ballista the up and down motion as well as the 360-degree spin on the base. Here I'm just doing a dry fit of everything. These little pins are made out of that small dowel that I use for the handle and some other pieces of styrene and plastic cabochons. This little plastic piece will be the device that pushes the arrow forward and then also resets the bowstring. I'll be using these rhinestones as nail heads, and so I stick a bunch to a piece of double-sided tape and prepare them for painting. I also prepare the needles and give everything a coat of flat black primer, then a coat of silver paint. I'd like to take this time to thank everyone for watching. If you are liking this video, please consider dropping a like, consider subscribing. I've got a whole bunch of other videos on my channel, and if you like this one, I'm sure you'll like at least a few others. I do have a Patreon. If you want to support me more directly, that is a great way of doing so, but there's absolutely no pressure at all. If you do join, you do get some cool perks like behind the scenes footage and a shout out in every single one of my videos. Those shout outs will happen right here during the painting process. There'll be links to my Patreon at the end of the video and in the description, as well as on my page. Alright, the self-promotion is over, I promise. You can go back to watching the video, and thanks again. I really appreciate it. To paint the rest of the ballista, I'm using a mix of black and brown acrylic paint mixed with a bit of water, and I'm just going to use that mixture to stain all of the wood pieces on the base and the ballista itself. Now there are some areas that the super glue isn't allowing the paint to soak into the wood, and I'll deal with those a bit later with some darker paint. But for now, I move on to a contrast paint, add a bit of water, and then add a bit more of a wood color into the ballista. And I finish things off with a dry brushing of this desert sand color. This just brings out some of the details and makes the edges pop. I then add the rhinestones that I painted earlier, and this is a pretty small detail where a lot of people won't even see it, but I know it's there and that's what counts. For the bowstring and the winding string in the back, I'm just using some cotton yarn that I have, and I'll cut off some pieces and then dye them in a mixture of brown paint and water, and then let them dry. Once all the paint is dry, I can put it all back together. I can then attach the bowstring and the winding rope in the back. I built this little wooden crate off camera, and I was mostly using it just for paint tests, but I decided I would incorporate it into the diorama. I'm using the excess string from before, unwinding it, and then cutting it into little pieces, and I'm trying to make it look like pieces of hay that they've used to pack the ballista bolts, or the needles in this case, and they carried it to the battlefield in this. I then lock it down with some isopropyl alcohol and watered down Mod Podge. For the base, I'm using this 6.5-inch wooden circle that I got from the craft store, and I'm going to glue it to a piece of XPS foam. And then once that's all nice and dry, I can cut off the excess with a knife. And after cutting and a bit of sanding and shaping, I have a nice base to work off of. I'm trying my hand at making some DIY sculpt-a-mold, and so I start by ripping up some pieces of toilet paper, adding some water, some Mod Podge, some plaster of Paris, putting a bit of brown and black paint in there for extra flavor, and then mixing it all up. I did not consult anything on this. I just sort of went off of what felt good. And so I just smear that nice, very gross looking material all over my model and hope for the best. I do want the ballista and the ammo box to sit in the dirt, like the weight of it is pressing down into it. So I put down some plastic wrap, and then I press the ballista base and the wooden box in place to give an indent where I'll glue it in later. Now that my instant ramen is done drying, I can glue the needles in place. I just use a bit of super glue. And just for fun, this is a real sewing needle on the left and the plastic yarn needle on the right. Now that my homemade sculpt-a-mold is pretty much all the way dry, I paint it with a coat of flat black primer and then a coat of brown acrylic paint. But once the paint dried, I didn't really like the texture. To be blunt, it kind of looks like a big pile of poop. So I am going to break out a nice jar of blackberry preserves, also known as a jar of dirt, and I'm going to glue some down on top to try and break up the poop texture. This is just watered down Mod Podge, and then I'll take my jar of dirt and sift it over the entire model base to give a nice even coat. Then once that's dry, I paint it with a nice sandy tan color over the entire thing. And then a dry brushing of an even lighter tan on top of that. This is another first for me. I've never done static grass before, but I just got a new machine and I gave it a test run. I'm feeling relatively confident, so let's get started. I debated on how much grass I should put in, but I decided I would just full send it and do over basically everything. The glue I'm using is just watered down Mod Podge, and then I very nervously start the application process. And honestly, it went a lot better than I expected. I'm a little heavy-handed on it, but luckily I'm doing it over this baking sheet, so any excess I can just tip it over, knock it off, and collect it for later. I'll leave a link in the description below to where you can get this exact machine. And if any of you have some static grass tips for me, I would be happy to hear them down in the comment section. The static grass is actually pretty strong, and so these light wood pieces just float on top of it. So I'm pressing the pieces down in order to flatten the static grass so that when I do glue them down, they're actually glued to the ground and not just floating on top of the grass. I use some heavy blocks of metal to weigh everything down until the glue dries. I also use this time to paint all the sides black. The last step is to just glue all the battle bobbins in place. This guy is the spotter, you can tell by his cool spyglass. This one is in charge, he's pointing out where to fire. This battle bobbin is the loader, and the final one winds the ballista and fires. He was the most difficult to get into place because I had to position the hands and feet correctly before I could glue everything down. And with that, this project is done. Hey, thanks for sticking around till the end of the video. If you did like this video, like I said before, please consider subscribing, consider liking. I've got plenty more videos on my channel, so check those out if you have some time. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, put them down in the comments section and I'll try to get back to you. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.